him.
Do you have an agenda that I can look at?
She does not need.
I'll give you my agenda.
Well, you know, if we have one.
You should have got one.
For us.
Sure.
Wait, how'd he get one?
I
We
printed
printed it from home. I figured we.
Oh, well, let me know if you need extra stuff.
it on my city-owned.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. And who takes roll call?
Ray,
Me.
City Manager Ray
They did
Young.
not give me a little form. All right.
Good Lord.
Mayor Lauer.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Young.
Mayor Lauer.
Here.
Danny Stephenson.
Here,
Jordan Wittrin excused. Carol Allen.
Here.
Victoria Rizzo.
Here.
Twyla Harrington.
Here.
That's it.
Rick Allen is on his way.
Oh, okay, so he will be here.
Yes, he had a meeting, and he just called and said he's on his way.
There we go. All right. Got it. So, roll is taken.
Do we have public comment? Anybody online? Okay, so number 3 is discussion of fire service and fire districts. Mike McKeel?
I was going to do our Zoom person first, if
Okay.
you don't mind, Madam Chair.
That's fine.
He's on there.
Is there any way to take off everything in the middle so we can see faces by chance?
Yes, there is.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're ready. Thank you.
The first speaker we have tonight is Chief Mitch Schneider. He's the former fire chief for the city of Gresham, which means he was our fire chief also. He is now the fire chief in Fremont. Chief?
In Florence, Arizona.
Lawrence, Arizona, where it's 90+ degrees today.
Comfortable 90-some.
So, thank you for joining us. I asked Chief Snyder to talk to us about his experience at Gresham in terms of the fire service, in terms of the financial struggles that are faced by the Gresham Fire Department, and to answer any questions you have about his viewpoint on how things in the future look and how maybe we should analyze the issues of what we should look forward to in our next fire contract. So go ahead, Chief Snyder.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Ray. And thank you, everybody, for having me in. It's good to see you all. So just talking about some of the issues that exist with Gresham Fire, some of the challenges that they're going to continue to face, and then maybe talk about some of the options that you have moving forward. So right now, you know that the city of Gresham is restricted by its tax rate cap and the legislation that was passed in the 90s with the the state constitution. You guys are all facing those financial concerns, and honestly, fire districts are not exempt from those financial caps either. They will exist. But the Gresham Fire Department, you have 6 1/3 stations. Some of them are owned by the city. 1 is owned by Portland. 2 are owned by Fire District 10. The Station 7-6, which is the newest station out there, owned by District 10, is a beautiful brand new station. Beyond that, you have the Portland Fire Station that you don't really have a lot of say over. You just pay the 1/3 of the station's costs to maintain that station. Station 5 out there in Troutdale is also a Fire District 10 station, but similarly to the other Gresham fire stations, it has challenges and it's costly to maintain. It has limited storage, and as services increase and new equipment is needed, it doesn't have the ability to store that equipment. Because of that, in all of those stations, you have contracts. For example, City of Gresham has a state contract to provide hazardous materials services. In that contract, it states that the equipment will be maintained indoors. They don't have space to maintain it indoors, and they haven't for years. So they're out of contract on it. Just one of the complications that they're facing. The training facility is also owned by District 10. It's adjacent to the property that Station 7-4 is located on. The training facility is a very old facility. Now, the property out there has a high value because it's in high demand in that commercial area, but for fire department use, it's an open space. That's great, but the tower is inadequate for current modern day training. You're also going to be facing needs in the future for station locations. When we did the Safer Council there, when I was the fire chief, we looked at current station locations and should they be relocated and moved, looking at the entire service area. And some of the stations should be relocated, and there is a need for at least one additional station right now to meet national standards, or to at least get closer to meeting national standards. And then you're going to see a projection in the future where you're going to need an additional, probably 2 stations over the next 20 years. So purchasing land for that now is going to be very important to you so that you can lock the price of that in. But again, you have the cost of that. Now, fire department direction, the way it's currently set up, is all directed by the City of Gresham. The contracts don't necessarily allow involvement by the 3 cities to the north and District 10. And those contracts are slightly different. The 3 cities have a similar pay structure, but District 10's pay structure is very different than the 3 cities. So if the City of Gresham decided to ask the 3 cities to have the same pay structure, a tax rate based on assessed valuation of the entire city, and then you change that tax rate based on an equivalency of what a Gresham taxpayer is paying, you're going to see a substantial increase in the cost of fire service, but you're not going to see an increase in services. In fact, what you're seeing over time is a decrease in services. And the way I tried to express this when I was the fire chief was, every year that I was the fire chief, the fire department's budget went up. But we also tracked costs, and costs went up every year. Now, costs are associated with COLAs that are negotiated by labor groups with just the City of Gresham. There's also step increases. People become paramedics, so they're certified. You get certification incentives. And then there's equipment costs and power bills and all the other things that come with the fire department. In every year that I was there, the cost for services, the services that existed when I arrived, they went up above what the fire department's budget was assigned for that year. So over the 4-year period, there was a $4.5 million gap in the costs, meaning the budget went up, but over that 4-year period, it went up $4.5 million less than the costs. So when that happens, something has to give. You don't have the money to spend, so you have to reduce services in some way, shape, or form. Now, there's also contractual agreements that limit what you can give. So contracts with labor group, for example, or contracts with the 3 cities in the district, those can't change. So you have to limit other services that are not addressed in that. All of these things that I'm talking about fall underneath the umbrella of what we were trying to address in the state. And just to remind you, the acronym for the word SAFER in the SAFER Council was Sustainable Affordable Funding for Emergency Response. Those first 3 words are the most important. Sustainable Affordable Funding. And that just simply does not exist. Now, there are some options that are being put on the table, and you probably saw that the city of Gresham put a levy on the ballot. They called it a public safety levy. There was some homeless services included in that. That public levy failed, and my understanding is they're looking at probably putting it back on the ballot. But that will help fill some of the gap. But where I struggled too was the lack of transparency. Just my personal moral value ethics is you need to be very transparent with your taxpayers and let the taxpayers really decide, do we want to spend our money that way or not? So I use the example, if you're currently spending $1 for the fire department and you're asking the taxpayers for 35 cents for the fire department, then the fire department's budget, if that levy of 35 cents is passed, should be $1.35. Simplifying this as much as I can here. But what you want to do is make sure that that 35 cents on paper comes in from the levy and goes to the fire department. But you want to make sure that you're not reducing the dollars that come from the general fund to the fire department. So let's say 35 cents comes in from a levy, but you reduce the general fund amount that you fund to the fire department by 10 cents, then the fire department's budget is $1.25. 100% of that 35 cents in the levy went there, but was that communicated clearly to the public? Now, I'm not saying that did happen or was going to happen. I'm just saying you want to be very transparent about how much money is going to where you're telling the taxpayer it's going to. There's also internal service charges. So the fire department, being a municipality there in Gresham, needs legal services. They need HR services, payroll services, and all of the other costs that go into a fire department or any one of the town's departments. If you arbitrarily increase those internal service charges, then you're also saying, did the fire department's budget go up? Now, arguably, you could say those internal service charges went up. You just want to make sure that you're clarifying and being transparent about what's happening with those funds. I think those are some of the challenges that you're facing as you contract services with the city of Gresham. I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm not saying that they're good. I'm just saying that they're potentials that you need to be aware of. So when I look at what really are the options for the 3 cities and the district, you have, I'm going to say, 4 options that I think are viable options. The first one is you can certainly continue to contract for services with the city of Gresham. They may come at you with a different fee amount, a different contract amount, some calculation, or a different formula in how they're asking for their funding, but you could certainly continue that contract for service. Now, secondarily, you could consider contracting with other departments. For example, would Portland Fire be interested? They could. You could contract with them. I think you would see an extreme pay cost of contract jump, but I don't know. Those conversations haven't taken place. You also have Clackamas Fire District 1 that now is, as I understand it, delivering service through contract to Sandy. You know, it's possible that you could contract with them, or maybe even go across the river to Vancouver or somewhere over there. Those are those are options where you contract for service. But within that same discussion about contracting is a third option of contracting with Fire District 10. Now, Fire District 10 currently doesn't have fire staffing, but they could say, we're not going to contract with the city of Gresham. We're going to stand up our own fire department, and they could work with all of the cities that want to contract with Fire District 10, including Gresham. Gresham could say, okay, we will contract with you as well. Those are options to consider. Now, they have some pros and cons, and the tax rate for Fire District 10 is a pretty healthy tax rate right now, but there will be a time, and I don't know what that projected timeline is, that they'll be facing the same tax cap that all of the cities in Oregon are going to be facing. So how long will the current tax rate fund the needs of the fire department if you formulate a fire department in District 10? That brings me to the fourth option, which is you could start an entirely new fire district with its own new boundaries, wherever you draw those boundaries, and establish a new tax rate. These options would clearly have to be voted on by your constituents there in your communities, and they needed to be supported to do that. So really the best way to figure out what the community would support is to do surveying. And there are great companies out there that work with fire departments, fire districts, municipalities, even fire authorities that exist there in Oregon, to say, how do we articulate what we're attempting to do to our voters, and how do we test their appetite for the different ideas that you're bringing forward. And they can help walk through that. Now, when we were doing the Safer Council, we brought a few of those folks in to just express how they can do that. And one of the short notes is whatever pathways you think are best, you would want to early on check the appetite of your voters. And then if you did select to move forward with putting something on the ballot, right before it goes on the ballot, you would want to re-ask your voters, how are you feeling about what we're talking about? Because if you know through these surveyors that your voters aren't going to support what you want to make quick adjustments so you know that you'll get that support. It's very difficult to spend the amount of time and resources, staff resources, to put a request to your voters only to have it fail. So you really want to hedge your bets, know what your voters are going to support, and then move in the direction of what your town city leaders want and what your voters will equally support. So I'll just pause right there. A lot of information in a very short amount of time, and happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Is there any other questions?
Come on, Tana, you held your tongue last night. Don't hold your tongue again. Don't leave us hanging.
So you, Mitch, you were saying that, you know, you had a $4.5 million gap over a 4-year period. And I remember towards the end of your tenure, you were talking about, and hopefully you can correct me on this, because I'm just doing this by memory, something like there was like a 13-minute time, you know, before the wheels ran on the engine, like from the time the call came into BOAC. Something like that. And that time had gotten worse over those 4 years. And how much did that deteriorate over the 4-year period, like the response times?
So I can't answer that data question right off the top of my head. I don't recall those numbers. It's nowhere near the 13 minutes. but what you're talking about is they measure every piece of time. So there is the unmeasurable time of event to the time that someone makes a 911 call. That's not measurable. But once that 911 call is made, you can measure the time that it takes to intake that call. Then you remeasure the time it takes to dispatch that call. Then you can measure from the time it dispatched, how quickly do the firefighters react to that? Meaning how long does it take them to get their gear on, get to the vehicle, and then the response time. So that first one is reaction time, the second one is response time, where you go, the wheels of the vehicle start turning to the point that they stop turning, where they get on scene. And then you can track even some more data, because if it's a medical patient that might be 3 stories up in a building, that's going to take some time to get your equipment from the rig to a patient's side, and then you'll radio, we're at the patient's side. So all of that can get measured, but there are many things that impact that. The need for training and units going out of service while other units are trying to cover the response area, the number of calls, back-to-back calls, meaning 2 simultaneous calls happen at the same time, and one rig is responding across the jurisdiction that it wouldn't have had to, because that rig's out of service, either training or handling a different 911 call. There's a number of those factors. Now, over the last roughly 30 years, the fire department has only added 1 additional 24-hour member. Now, you'll see like the city has added more firefighters, but the response area has not. So the city has, incorporated some of the unincorporated areas over the last 30 years. And as they acquired those areas, it went from a District 10 fire station and staffing to a city employee and staffing. They stayed there, so there were no more employees, but now they're city employees. So the city can say, well, we added employees, but the geographical area being covered over that period of time only saw one uniformed 24-hour firefighter added, and that was during the time that I was there. The 4th person was added to their truck. Now, all of these things on top of the call volume, you're seeing 300% and 400% increases in call volume over that same time. The more calls, the more out of service time, all of those things impact the response time, along with traffic being added to the community. All of those things start factoring into response time. But instead of talking about how long does it take to get a unit somewhere, what we're really saying is the impact to the community. A CPR event where it takes someone noticing that we need CPR to the time that somebody starts CPR. If after 6 to 7 minutes, it is a life has never been saved in that response time. So if your response time, your time of noticing event, all the way to the time that a firefighter gets next to that patient, if it's longer than that, I think the longest time saved was right around 7.5 minutes. If it's longer than that, you can say that the likelihood of saving that patient is 0, because you just never have. And then the impacts of fire growth, the exponential growth of a fire from the time it starts to the time of arrival. If you add a minute to the response time or 2 minutes, you're adding exponential property loss or environmental consequences, or very likely life loss due to that exponential growth. But back to your original question, I don't have the exact numbers to tell you how much that response time grew.
And I would say, I think we're in agreement. I think one of the big issues is the response time, right? So, I mean, at some point, it's just like, why bother call the coroner? And you might as well get him on the way, because the party's going to be over. I think it comes down to that. It could be a significant loss of life.
Yeah, and there certainly are a lot of factors in that, but that's exactly what the fire department is there for, and in a basic sense, to save life, property, and the environment. And the longer it takes them to get there for all of these factors and others that we're talking about, they're going to impact how much is saved. And so that's, one of your guys' considerations is how much are you willing to spend to save, fill in the blank.
Right. And that's kind of the underlying question. And call volume's up 300%, let's say, and you got the same number of stations and really the same number of trucks and those types of things, and you've still got to do training. So how does that work? When I'm 75 and I'm in training, so that's backfilled by somebody else, is there like some standard trigger point where 75 stops training and goes back out, or do they continue training until they're done, or?
So there's a number of different factors. So there are some specialty teams like, water rescue that performs water rescue on the Sandy and the Columbia there. And there's some high angle, low angle rescue, some all types of specialty training. The way the city of Gresham had tried to do that was bring those specialty teams in off duty and pay an overtime rate to train off duty so that it didn't impact the response system. Now, that's a very costly way to do that. It wasn't contractually obligated by the city. So while I was there, when budgets were not met, that was one of the things that ended up getting cut, so that you didn't bring people in off duty, which meant they had to train on duty, which then starts impacting what you're talking about. Now, the battalion chiefs, who are the commanders for the day that oversee the entire response area, if things start to get busy or you have significant calls that are taking multiple units out of service, they'll cancel training and say, look, we're going to have to do it another time. Our call volume is having a problem. They'll start asking for neighbors to help, like, Clack One or Portland or Sandy. Hey, do you guys have staff that you can help us with? And at times, Gresham will help them as well. But it's really the unknown. You don't know when a 911 call is going to come in, or you have lots of volume. There just really isn't a good time to train because you have lots of call volume, which is the case there in the East County. You can pretty much count on people are going to be out of service for training, and a call is going to come in, and you're very likely going to have longer response times during that time. And it is just the unfortunate problem that exists with that type of model.
Now, you mentioned a need for a total of 3 stations, and is that for Troutdale proper?
So no, I'm talking about the entire response area that the Gresham Fire serves. So
Okay.
Fire District 10, the 3 cities, and Gresham itself. Now, the Troutdale area, what our data suggested at the time, I'm imagining it's still pretty close to this, Station 7.5 should be moved south up the hill a little bit, and a new station should be added somewhere around the Troutdale Wood Village, boundary line, somewhere in that area.
And I guess I'll pop the top on this can anyhow, but there was a number of years ago where there was a little study and exploration done about possibly doing something different. And at that time, and this is, I know, before your tenure, Gresham's position was that they would not provide aid to Troutdale in the event of a situation. Is that still like the case today, or has that changed, or do you know?
So I think what you're talking about is the proposal that was written by the volunteer fire department to the east to start serving the Troutdale community. And then some of the conversations saying if you did that the city of Gresham would not provide a mutual aid response. Is that what you're referring to?
That would be correct, sir.
So I did read everything that I could find when I was there on that. That document had a lot of holes in it, and certainly would not deliver the type of service that you're getting right now, even though it's deteriorating. That would have created a big problem. But if you were to move towards something like that, or the three cities and the district say, we're going to stand up our own fire department, that's going to be an issue for the city of Gresham as well. The amount of money that you guys, the four entities, are collectively paying would be a 20 to 25% hit to their fire department's budget. They would not be able to take that without substantial changes. They also would need mutual aid contracts from this new entity, just as much as that new entity would need mutual aid from Gresham. So there would still need to be some contracts where, hey, we recognize each other is going to have to help out, and you're going to have to work together to address that. But that's going to be a two-way street. It wouldn't just be you guys need it. Gresham would need it as well.
Okay, so that would be different, because we were told it wouldn't be offered. It wouldn't be an option at that time.
So politically, maybe somebody is going to say that. That would be a very poor political decision, in my personal opinion, because they would need help. And so they're going to be asking for help, or they're going to go without, or they're saying, we know that you need help. There's a problem where lives, potentially property, and the environment are being damaged, but because we're mad at you, we're not going to come help you. That would be a sad state to have exist.
Yeah, that was kind of how it was presented, so thank you. Thank you.
Is there any other questions? We'll go on to,
Yes, we want. Thank you, Chief Snyder.
yes, thank you.
You're very welcome.
And at this time, Mike McKeel is here to talk to the committee. Mike has been the chair of Fire District 10 for a number of years. He's been involved with fire services in East County for a lot of years. And on the side, he fixes teeth and builds developments. So Mike, come on up, have a seat at the on the spot table. And primarily asked Mike to come because to talk about the option, as Chief Snyder talked about, you continue with Gresham, but we're tied to their financial issues. But the other option is a fire district in two different forms, and Mike is a great expert on that. So have at it, Mike.
Yeah, well, as Ray said, I've been with District 10 somewhere around 20 years. And I also grew up in this area. And just as a little sidelight, my dad and a guy named Jimmy Moore started the M&M restaurant in Gresham. That's still in business since 1946. So we kind of are very familiar with what's going on out here. But anyway, District 10 used to be your fire department. And it was a fire department for what is now most of Gresham. It went all the way to 82nd Street, which is Portland city limits. It went east to Sandy, northeast to Corbett, and south to Boring, and all the way to the Columbia River. We still have part of unincorporated, which probably should be Fairview, but it's not, but Interlochen is our property too that we are responsible for. And we also are responsible for Maywood Park, the city of Maywood Park. But we have Portland Fire cover that area for us. We don't actually pay for firefighters from Gresham there. The question you guys are asking about tonight is a really old one. It goes back almost to the time I started, helping District 10. And it's not only a technical problem with fire, but there's a little politics involved too that gets in the way. I know I went back, when we first started to really get serious about annexing Gresham into Fire District 10. Chuck Becker was a mayor of Gresham. He was also my football coach at Portland State. And we had some pretty roundhouse discussions that he felt Gresham would not be a true city unless they had police and fire and responsibility for that, for their citizens. And, you know, I respect thinking about that, but I also tell you, when you have a 911 call that you need the fire department, they don't care what it says on the door of the fire truck. They want them there in a time. And we talked about response time. You know, I've also been trained, even though I was a dentist in the Marine Corps, we were also trained as field medics for the 1st Marine Division. And you really need, if somebody's unresponsive, you need to be working on them within 4 minutes. There is no way anywhere in this whole service area that you can say that it's a 4-minute response time happens. And in rural area, you know, which we're responsible for now, east of Gresham, clear to Sandy, you know, our run times are a lot of 8 minutes because it's just a larger area and we've got one station that covers a larger geographic area. But, you know, I have come to the conclusion, if you could wave a magic wand to provide fire service, fire and emergency service, and even though it's fire, you know, most of the calls are medical. They're either for injuries or for people that, you know, get, you know, very sick and need help. But if you could wave a magic wand, we would probably do what almost everybody in the 3-county area has done, is gone to a fire district where it has its own tax base, it has its own board that oversees it. Some people say that Gresham, you're going to lose control if it, you know, if everybody goes into a fire district. But there's still going to be probably a 7-person board from every city, from the unincorporated area and from Gresham, that's going to be responsible. And basically, you get rid of the city boundaries, you've got all these tens of thousands of people that Gresham Fire protects now. And like I say, they don't care where the help comes from, they just want to make sure they get it. So we are very fortunate as a fire district to have an adequate tax base where we build a $4 million fire station, and we've got about 1.5 years, it'll be all paid off without a bond. We also bought a new fire engine 2 years ago that was about $550,000, and we didn't have to go up for bond. If that tax base were applied to the 3 cities, to Gresham and to District 10, our rate could go substantially down because we have a $2.86 tax rates, but we need all that money because out in the rural area, you know, there's not that much valuation like there is in an incorporated city. So when we tried to get, or we did get a vote on it in Gresham to annex, and it went down, and we thought that the rate would probably be about $2.10 a thousand, but it would have relieved Gresham of right around $1.90 a thousand that they wouldn't have to pay that they were paying. Now, Gresham's tax rate, I don't know, what is your tax rate, Ray? Is it
374, I think.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit more than Gresham's. Gresham's
Yeah.
360, I think. And if you take, say, if they went to the county sheriff to do their stuff rather than that, or in particular fire, you know, they get rid of about $1.50 that they need to use for their general fund money to do it. But right now, they're taking that general fund money and they're using grants and in other sources of income other than their general fund to make it. But I'll tell you, the wages of firefighters is going to go up, just like everything else, especially trained people. We had an entering training class, and we lost about 1/3 of them because they went, even though they were contracted to be hired at Gresham, they went to another district because the pay was higher. So no matter what, you're going to have to pay what the going rate is to get these guys, you know, especially if you want to get really good people. And this is a critical job that requires, you don't want to have anybody other than the best you can get to do what it's very physical. There's a lot of science to it, you know, you got to understand. And so I think, you know, like I say, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be nice to have the 3 cities in District 10 to be back what it was, you know, years ago. District 10 started in 1933. So we kind of got it figured out how this has to work. And and you know, what happened with you guys coming in is Gresham saw a time when they could contract with you guys to make up some shortfall. They didn't really add any stations to what they already had. They didn't add any more firefighters, but they got money from the 3 cities. But now the call volumes, like I say, have gone up. The stations aren't in the strategic areas that they need to be. And one of the things that we just were informed the last meeting is the cost of a fire engine, which was $550, is now over $1 million. The cost of a ladder truck is about double that. And these things wear out after a while, and they've got to be replaced. So I think it's a miracle we've been managing to do what we've done up to this point. But if you look into the future, I think the key to it is for the public, because the only way you're going to fix it is for the public to vote for it. And to get them to vote for it, they have to be well educated and, like Mitch was saying, very transparent. But they need to know, right now they know that if they call, somebody's going to come. They just don't know that they're coming twice. It's taking them twice as long to get to you. If you don't know CPR and you've got an unresponsive patient, after about 4.5 minutes, it's pretty much over. And so I think that the politics has to be less of the solution, and it needs to be, people really have to understand that it's going to cost them about $300 a year more to have the way it needs to be. But, I mean, you look at, when I was in college, I bought a new car for $3,000. Now they're $40,000. So, it's the way it is. But if you guys got any questions, I'd be glad to ask or answer as best I can. Mitch is a very, more technical knowledge than I have, but we've been doing this for a long time and talking about these same things. One of the things that people always wonder, why are you taking a fire truck to a medical call? It isn't that they're taking a fire truck to a medical call. They're moving the fire station from the fire station to the medical call in case they need to go to a fire. And one of the solutions, I remember I was in a meeting down in Wood Village, they talked about, which we have, a medical response vehicle, but it takes more people to do that. You still have to have, no matter what, you still have to have 3 or 4 firefighters at a station. And if you have a SUV with medical stuff, you're going to have 2 more. So that means instead of 3 or 4, you're going to have 5 or 6. So anyway, anything you'd like, I don't have anybody's going to get mad at me for telling you the truth, but I'll tell you the truth.
So I got a question. Mike, do you have any, last time this was talked about or studied, was this studied before?
Well, they started, when Mitch was here, we started what's called a Safer Council.
And I was
And-
on that, and Ray and I saw
Yeah,
it.
right, yeah, and I was too. And Gresham kind of put a halt to it.
Yep.
But I think, there's a new city manager there, and I've got a fairly good relationship with her. And I don't, I don't want to offend anybody, but I think, these are hard questions, and and people got to put down the pride in, what they think they need to be. But, the police and fire are kind of the glamour jobs in any city.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to give it up, I think it's just hard for some people. I've talked to Travis about it, and I think he kind of has that thing, I don't give up my fire department. And I said, Travis, you could on all the engines, you could put the city's name on it, Gresham's name on it, a division of District 10 below it. They don't care, and nobody reads what the hell it says on that, when they come to a call. They want somebody that knows what they're doing when they get there, and they get there in time.
Yeah. So the reason for my ask is, if this was studied 20 plus years ago, if you remember any of the numbers that came out then with the old populations for the 3 cities in the Fire District 10 area, as to what type of service model would be needed to cover that area then compared to now.
It's the service, what we have for facilities and the service for the number of calls that come in To give an example, Station 74 gets about 4,000, almost 5,000 calls a year. 71 at Gresham City Hall is about the same. Out here in District 10, we get 500. So, the guys that want to sleep all night usually like to work at 76. And they don't get to sleep every night, but the other ones that you've got, we just count 4,000 calls and divide that by the number of days in a year. They're out of the barn all the time. And they're more dangerous. I don't know if you guys saw the news last Sunday, but there was a shooting where Burnside crosses Division, and the guy unloaded 7 rounds on the corner, and I don't know whatever happened to the guy. He was alive, I think, when they got him out of there. But you got to figure that if you didn't kill the guy, then those extra rounds went somewhere, and there's huge traffic going by on both those streets. So, it's a little bit in some places and sometimes like the Old West, you get towards Rockwood. And this fire service levy, when it went down, the fire and police, the places that went down the hardest were Persimmon and Rockwood. And those are the places. Persimmon has about a 10-minute run time for medical call. And Rockwood, has got calls for everything all the time. That's,
So if you say, what was it, Station 74 in City Hall, similarly had about 5,000 calls a year. I don't know what type of call volume off the top of my head comes out of East County or Troutdale for that matter.
Yeah, it's more than 76 for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing, but I would say it's probably in the 1,500-1,600 calls a year.
So
Now,
let's say on a big call year that there's 2,000. What would you say, in your opinion, and Chief Snyder chime in as well, what would you say would be an adequate amount of staffing to cover, let's say, 2,000 calls a year?
Well, the national standard, there should be 4, especially this is for fire mostly. There should be 4 firefighters, paramedics at a station all the time. The national average is 4. All of our stations are 3. And the reason that there's 4 is if you have a fire and somebody has to go into the building, there has to be 2 can go in and 2 have to stay out, in case the 2 get in trouble. So now if you get, like say in Rockwood or some of these old, Willie Walkup apartments, they get a fire in that and somebody has to go in to get somebody out. It's a risk of the people that are on the call to be able to go in and get out and feel like they've got some help if something happens.
Just to kind of add to that
Yeah,
question. So the entire Gresham Fire Department's probably hugging 20,000 calls a year right now. I haven't seen the latest data, but you're pretty close to that number. Keep in mind that number is a single unit response. So many calls, you have multiple units responding. So if you have 10 calls with 3 units responding, you could say collectively that's 30 responses, but we call it 10. But trying to address what you're saying, when we were on the Safer Council, we were saying, look, you're going to have to bite this elephant, one bite at a time, rather than trying to, solve the entire problem at once. And that is, you have station problems. They need to be relocated and they needed to be built correctly. And then you need to staff those at least with your minimum staffing that Dr. McKeel was just expressing. And then you look at your data. How does your data suggest response times are happening? And what you would end up doing is you have 1 unit out of a station, you would maybe add a second unit to that station to absorb the calls that might be at a busier station, one that's running 5,000 calls, and leave just a single unit at a station that's running 500 calls, for example. But once you fix your main problem, which is the facilities and the facility locations, and you staff those, that's when you would start really looking at the data again, saying, how did it impact the data? Moving station 5 to the south and adding another station, to that Troutdale Wood Village corridor there, how did that actually impact? We can project it, but then there's a real impact that would need to be measured.
Yeah, I think, Mitch is right. The thing that you're looking at is if you extrapolate into the future, the call volumes, and I think, Mitch, when you were here, you guys projected what the call volumes would be over 4 or 5 years from now, which is a short term. And it gets kind of scary to see, that you're going to have to choose between calls of what is going to be more important, and somebody's going to get somebody a lot later. And one of the things that that it isn't part of the fire department is the emergency call center. They're having a lot more calls that are going, unanswered for length of time nobody wants to have happen. And now they say they're going to try to use AI to at least question somebody, have a robot question them, and then channel the calls that really need to go to the guys that really need to get something done fast. But it's the whole system is headed in a direction that somebody needs to help.
And to add to that a little bit, when I was there, we worked out an agreement, a contractual agreement with AMR to develop a non-emergent medical response system. And AMR was putting funds into account dedicated for that. If you can stand up this non-emergent medical response system, there's a large volume of calls that do not need the 4 to 6 minute response time. And that is already identified through your criteria-based dispatch system. So adding an additional service or adjusting the way you deliver services is a big time and money saver as well.
Yeah, Mitch, I think another thing, just to complement the Gresham Fire Department, with all the challenge they've had, they've got a hugely efficient response to people who are, heart attacks that are completely unresponsive, and the guys end up walking out of the hospital. And I think, Mitch, it's about double what the national average is. Is that not correct?
Yeah, no question that the women and men that work in Gresham Fire, the boots on the ground doing the work, they're very well trained, they're very dedicated to the community, and they're doing the very best they can with what they're provided. So yes, absolutely, hats off to them. I always caution CPR data statistics because it's measured so differently across the nation. And so, for example, in Seattle, to count as a CPR save, it has to be a witnessed collapse. There has to be bystander started CPR. The initial heart rhythm has to be ventricular fibrillation. And if you don't meet those criteria, you're not even counted into the group. Whereas in the Multnomah County, the medical program director wants to count all cardiac events regardless of statistics. So when you compare it, it becomes a little bit muddy to understand. But Gresham Fire does have a very high success rate.
I guess I would just think if you're unresponsive and don't have a pulse, wouldn't that count for something? No matter what the statistics are. I've seen situations where there's 3 on a truck and it goes out. Do we have that happen very often?
Well, there's always 3 on a a truck.
Okay. And you said that we're moving the fire station to the truck in case there's a fire.
Well, yeah,
But if there's 3 guys on a truck, they can't fight a fire.
sometimes what would happen is somebody can take over the medical call while they go to the fire, but if they have to go all the way back to the station to get the truck,
But if there's only 3 of them, they can't go in and fight a fire because they need 4.
well, no, you can still fight a fire with 3. It's just that you increase the risk that if somebody gets in trouble inside a fire, that it's better to have 4.
Okay, so 2 can go in if there's 3
Well, I'll
and
let
there's
Mitch
a fire.
answer
I'm
that
just trying to
because you have yeah.
understand, is it okay to have 3 or do they have to have 4?
Well, we've been operating with 3 for quite a while, you know, and
Okay.
we've been okay, but Mitch, you want to comment on,
Sure, so there's state law that addresses this, there's federal law that addresses it, and then there's national standard. Typically speaking, state and federal law are based on national standard. What you're kind of talking about is a 2 in, 2 out rule that is national standard, state law in Oregon, most states, where if you believe there is a life being threatened in a burning building, then 2 people can go inside the building. You can't go in with 1, 2 have to go in. But if 2 go inside a building, there has to be 2 people outside the building. So when you have a unit with 3, they will probably try to make a rescue if it's a known rescue, but they're operating outside of state law and national standards. They're supposed to wait for another unit to arrive so that you have at least 2 more people outside that are capable of rescuing the firefighters should something go wrong. So firefighters will fight to have 4 on a unit, but when they go out of service for a medical call that would typically only need 2, and then a fire call happens at the same time, you can see the problem that arises. But just a single house fire, the national standard is you would like your first unit with 4 people to arrive within 4 minutes, and a full complement, or what is called an effective firefighting force, of 16 firefighters to arrive on that scene within 8 minutes.
I know Clackamas has done seems like pretty effective job at times where they backfilled with volunteers. And it seems like over here, we've been less likely to ever, I guess I would say, embrace a model like that.
well, let me tell you something about, because I get in trouble with some of my friends who used to be volunteer firefighters in Gresham. When I was a little kid, the Gresham Fire Department was all volunteers. The technical abilities and technical learning and technical skills have increased, you know, to where you're almost got neurosurgeons working on these fire trucks now. The problem Gresham had is that back, as I was informed, is it was hard to get the training for the firefighters that were volunteers to keep up on their training and to show up on time. If they're paid and they're employees of yours, you can tell them exactly what they got to do. With volunteers, sometimes it just doesn't happen. You've got people who are very good at being a volunteer. They keep up on their training, but it's not. When I was a little kid, it was some place for the guys to go to do drills on Wednesday night and then go drinking. And that doesn't work today. But a lot of places, you know, especially in Eastern Oregon, there's lots of volunteer stuff, you know, they just have no choice.
And there's some that work effectively and there's some that don't. And
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you, but I also know some firefighters that go out and build houses on their days off and are up really late, and I don't know how they can be the least bit effective when they're at their job.
One of the things.
So if you've got a guy that's committed, I'm just wondering, let's say you had some good people, wouldn't that be a good, I guess I'd say bullpen or backfill type situation to cover some of the shortfall? Union
It-
aside?
Well, it opens a lot of questions and how you do to make that effective. And I think in areas like this where the call volume is that high, it becomes a little bit more of a problem to get an effective thing going. I know we've talked about that, many times. And it's not as easy today as it was in 1952. I mean, people are busy, they got kids, they got whatever, And I remember when Gresham was all volunteer and these guys had these little alarms, they'd get in the house, they'd have to get in their car and drive to the fire station. So that, the call times were probably triple what they should be. And Sandy was a volunteer for a long time. And I remember seeing guys jump in their car outside their house and run to the fire station. But I think now when you talk about this critical time of 4 minutes you try to shoot for it with volunteers that aren't at the station every day, available, it gets to be a little dicey in some ways.
So just to address that specifically, there's roughly 33,000 fire departments across the United States, and roughly 90% of them are volunteer fire departments. But keeping volunteers trained, as Dr. McKeel was just expressing, to have them meet all of the standards required is very time intensive and it's very expensive. That's not to say that they don't get used, but if you don't follow those laws and those national standards very closely for your volunteer staff, I mean, certainly your paid staff as well, you do open yourself up to liability. If nothing goes wrong, you can do all kinds of things wrong and not too many people are questioning. It's when you have a problem where that creeps in a bit. But there are very well managed volunteer, part paid, part volunteer programs all across the nation.
And people choose to live in rural areas, even if you have paid firefighters, whatever, the run times, you got in Eastern Oregon, some of them half an hour, maybe even an hour. And, but that's, in an area where you're incorporated here, we're still shooting for the 4 minutes.
I know some firefighters that work in other states where it is literally almost 1,000-mile distance they have to cover from one
I
station.
don't know, Mitch could tell you this too, but, we've got a hazmat unit at the Kane Road Station, and their responsibility goes clear up to Washington, clear to Madras. And I guess the state is now rethinking how that works now, but we were thinking, that was just for the Gresham, Protection District. But, if they had something in Madras, the guys from Kane Road have to go and do it.
So,
Yeah, Rich.
it is obvious to me that we're talking to a couple people here that have really good backgrounds, really good knowledge on this subject. So I have to ask these questions, right? As long as you're here, I gotta ask. We took a look at fire service a number of years ago, right? And at the time, the things that came up were that in order to service people in a timely fashion, we were going to need 2 fire stations, one in the north and one in the south. It was evident if we moved that fire station from Cherry Park Road, where it is now, our times might actually look worse because the number of calls that come out of there that go to the retirement home would skew the numbers to make it look worse. It was also evident at the time that property insurance is based on the level of fire service you. So there's a financial factor there. And it was also evident that not very many of the calls were actually fire. They were mostly.
Well, they're mostly medical no matter what,
Right.
everywhere.
And so we were talking about, with the 2 stations, having life-saving and smaller trucks, and at least one of them having a larger fire truck. These are just things we explore, right? And that if one medical team in the smaller truck went out and saved a life, right, and they got a call, then the other two-person team would meet up at the fire truck on scene. Because the first team to arrive could initially do the setup and get the hoses out and stuff like that, right? And so, that's all based on what kind of calls do you expect, what kind of capacity you think you're gonna need. But the reason why I'm getting into this is I wanna ask the two of you, if you had the ability to design the way we're doing fire service here in Troutdale, provide service that can save lives at a reasonable cost. Now, I gotta tell you, I agree with you 100%. If you want to retain good people, you pay them competitively to do so. So I don't want to skimp there. I'm just talking about technically, would you set this up different? And I'm interested to hear what your suggestions would be.
Well, locating fire stations and what you have in a fire station as far as the services, there's a science to that. And basically, when we located 76 where it is, we had to look at a map of where, over a few years, where all the calls were. And we wanted that station to be in the middle of where all those calls were, because if those calls continued in the same pattern in the future, that station should be equidistant from all those calls. You don't want it at one end and then have to go to the other end to.
Yeah, and part of what's been changing is the city's been elongating, doing more development out in the strip property and expanding housing down to the south. That's what was driving it,
Yeah.
projection of
Yeah,
population.
I think, the people who do the studies to locate fire stations and the services that they do, they're gonna come up with a scientific method to locate where they should be and where they can do the most good. And all of it is to get the services faster when they're needed.
Based on what the public is willing to support. right?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're talking about doing more than one fire station, I actually had lunch with Chief Lewis today because we're renegotiating our contract with them. And I think it was a Tualatin Valley station, they're doing a new one, it's a larger station. We paid $4 million for our station, it wasn't that long ago. The new station at Tualatin is gonna be $18 million.
Wow.
Now,
And yet, so we also have houses out in the countryside, right? And when you go out there, they also have very nice fire stations and equipment, but not the expensive buildings that we have here. Is there some that drives those expensive buildings?
well, no, they have to be built to a standard, a state standard for, it's a higher standard than you have for building houses and apartments and everything else. These are,
In a city versus a rural?
no, it's not the
community?
city, it's just their emergency service buildings go under a different, uniform building code.
Oh, right. And what I'm
Yeah.
referring to is when I checked on the prices that rural communities were paying for their fire stations.
Well, some of those guys,
versus what
they
the City was
use,
paying. City was
Yeah.
quite a bit more.
what is the code, Mitch, that, it's a central service building,
Mhm.
and they have to be built to a standard that is much different. Now, you get out in the rural areas and, where they're short on dough, they're gonna be different kind of, things. I don't know how they do it or what they do. Now, most of them, I don't think they're building a lot of new stations in rural eastern Oregon. I think they're using stuff that's been there forever. But new stations, when we built 76 and I started looking at all the stuff, when it was framed and all the wires and stuff that are going through there, that's where the cost comes in. We actually came in $300,000 under budget on our station. And, but, it's basically concrete floors and the framing of the building has to be such that it can withstand an earthquake that other buildings couldn't.
Right.
And that's where the cost comes in.
Yeah, an emergency.
And you're also, if
Lose your-
you build one, you
first
have to do
responders.
prevailing wages, which costs more. You can't go out and just get the cheapest guy to do it. They have to pay prevailing wages law. And you're also, you gotta have somebody that's bonded that can bond public buildings. So that's what all goes into it. In fact, we had a little extra money and we did some nice woodwork inside ours, but it's basically a place with concrete floors and that's about it, but I know Mitch mentioned it, we have the training center, and it's about a 1950s variety training center.
Right.
We have enough room, although I don't think it's located where it should be, but we've got about 3 or 4 acres out next to 76, and we could put it in our training center. We could sell that, down in Rockwood, but there needs to be a new training center in addition to, what we've, in the stations. But the location of stations, there's a science to it. I don't know exactly how it's done, but it basically has to, you have to put them where it gets the calls the best.
Right.
And so just on that topic, during the Safer Council, we went through that whole study. We projected out over 20 years. And that still exists. I meant to look today to see if they were still up on the City of Gresham's Fire Department website, the Safer Council videos, because they were recorded and they were put on the website. But that information was already done and created for the entire response area, the 4 cities in the district. So that does still exist.
Just 2 comments. First of all, the comment is that this whole issue with facilities is going to be a big problem someday, because as long as we contact with Gresham decides what facilities they need, where they go, what gets updated. They have to go to get a bond from their residents to pay for it, but it's to benefit the other 3 cities, and they can't put a bond levy in front of the Troutdale citizens. And so they're gonna have this huge expense for facilities coming down the road, and as long as we keep this current model, Gresham's gonna have to figure out how they're gonna stick part of that bill to us without the ability for us to have a bond levy out here to help pay for those facilities. And then my second point was to ask Mitch, do you recall what the number was that estimated over the next 20 years that facilities would cost to upgrade, and new facilities that would be recommended to be built that Gresham would have to figure out how to pay for?
Yes, so the numbers that Dr. McKeel was just talking about, that 15 to 20 million in today's dollars is not an unrealistic number for a station. That's land and building all included and built for growth. So to project what it was over the next period of time, I don't recall that number specifically, but there are a lot of things that go into a fire station now that didn't have to go into a station, like positive pressure inside the sleeping quarters or the housing quarters to keep the diesel exhaust out of those areas. Firefighter cancer rates are on the rise, so you have all types of things that to address that. There's all types of exhaust systems inside the bay areas to exhaust those out. And then these buildings are now being built, to be commercially resilient. Concrete floors, concrete walls, stainless steel equipment. They're built to last a long time. And then once they need to be remodeled, they're just gutted and remodeled on the inside because they're built to last on the outside. You're paying a lot of that long-term cost up front today to build them.
Now, another question is, I remember you did a whole report. We did a report on every fire station in Gresham and the upgrades that were needed, because one of them at least doesn't even have a female locker room in it or set up for both sexes. Do you recall, was there a number that that study came up with to upgrade all the fire stations to current standards?
So the proposal really was to rebuild all of the stations. None of them are adequate, with the exception of Station 76 and the Portland Station 31. Those are 2 newer stations. All of the other stations were inadequate. So it was either tear them down and rebuild them on site, or relocate and build new in different areas. So the facilities that you have are they're inadequate.
One thing I'd add too, and I think Mitch would agree, it's getting tougher and tougher to acquire the land to put the stations where they need to be. It just doesn't exist. And the longer it goes, the not doing that, the harder it's going to be.
yeah, you run into, eminent domain and tearing buildings down, those type of issues. There is still certainly land available, but the longer you wait, obviously, the more expensive that becomes and the less it's available outside of an eminent domain process.
So if I'm thinking this through, it's gonna cost no matter what, so Gresham's gonna have to improve their buildings, get new fire trucks, whatever they need. And if we're looking at doing ours for the three cities or, Troutdale, then we're looking at the same thing, right? I mean, is that not?
We're looking at a cost increase regardless of what happens, regardless of
Yeah.
what we choose.
Exactly.
And the
That's
story-
why all of our board on District 10 feels that reforming District 10 to include Gresham, and actually geographically, it would almost be the area it was prior to all these annexations. If everybody was included in it, it actually makes the cost per person less. The more people, it's just like anything else, the more customers you have at a Safeway store, the cheaper it is to operate it.
But what's the realistic outlook of Gresham saying, well, sure, we're gonna go to District 2?
To go to a fire district, it's tough. Yeah, I mean, I think Travis being the mayor is not too wild about it. I think people, fear a loss of control. But if it was a fire district, the citizens who are the ultimate control, just like you guys in Troutdale, you're the city council, you're responsible for all the people that voted you into this job. And so if everybody in this area were in a fire district and a board represented all those people from all those different geographic areas, that's the whole idea of running a public service, is the public from all parts of that service area are represented.
So I can tell you an experience that I experienced at the high school not 2 weeks ago scared me. We called 911 on a student who was having a seizure. We were told there was 8 calls ahead. It was faster for us to have the parent come pick up the kid and take them to the hospital than it was to wait for any kind of assistance whatsoever. That's scary,
Yeah.
especially when we have somebody who's having a heart attack, and I'm sorry, we can't get to you for another hour.
Well, what I think we've always advocated is for as many people as can to have CPR training, so you can, that makes a huge difference. Seattle, that's why their save rate was so much higher, is they went on a real binge of making people know how to do that. And it saved a lot of people. But like I say, if you just look at the numbers that Mitch and I are talking about tonight, you can see the future, that just what you just described is going to become more common and maybe even worse. But I think that people, if you're going to go out for a vote to have that happen, say if you guys decide that it would be better to try to, say, the 3 cities in Gresham all want to try to merge into District 10, which is what it used to be before everybody started carving it up. The public really needs to be educated so that they have an emotional buy-in to paying a little extra money to do it. Because Gresham originally, before Measure 3, had a tax rate of $5.50. But because they didn't need it all, they were at $3.60. And when Measure 5 went into effect, it froze it at that. They couldn't go back to the original tax base.
And just for example, the city of Portland tax base is over $7, twice what Troutdale and Gresham is.
Well, almost every city in Oregon, when we did that study back when we had the vote, almost every city, no matter what, Salem, Roseburg, all of them are over $5 to $7 per thousand. And we're sitting here in one of the, areas of the most people in the state of Oregon, Multnomah County, and most of these cities are 3.5, 360, 370.
Yeah, also just know that Gresham is actively pursuing a consultant to explore the financial impact of a fire district to the residents of Gresham. So they are taking seriously the idea that they should have to explore at least what that looks like, because as Mitch just talked about, they're experiencing a significant financial crunch to provide emergency services, fire, police, et cetera, and their last bond levy failed, and even though those bond levies only last 5 years, but they also see capital costs going up in the future. So they are starting to realize that they at least have to explore for their citizens another financing option. And just a note, I was looking at all fire district, Clackamas County Fire District, Walden Valley Fire District. A majority of cities in the metro area do not use general fund money for fire protection. They are part of a fire district, and they pay that extra couple dollars per thousand. 12 in the Valley has a local option levy, makes theirs about $2 a thousand. Clackamas County pays about $2.40 a thousand. So cities like Beaverton, Tigard, Wilsonville, Newburgh, Sherwood, Westland, Oregon City, Milwaukee, Happy Valley, they don't pay any general fund dollars for fire services. It's just all comes directly on an additional tax bill on the property taxes. So this is a common avenue that other cities have gone in the metro area to be able to meet that funding gap.
And see, we've already got the district formed. We've already got the tax base established. You do a new one, you know, it's just harder. And it, you know, like I say, I've been an advocate for everybody being in the fire district since I was on that job. And it's been about 20 years. But like I say, ultimately, the citizens got to decide for that, and for them to decide, I think they need to be very well educated. You know, my wife ran for county commissioner, and one of the things I don't think we've done in the past is she probably knocked on 61,000 doors in the time she was running for office. That really means a lot to people to have somebody show up here, and if we get, you know, people that would do that, I think that would help. But I think they got to realize that if they're in trouble, and they're going to be in trouble because we're in trouble, you know, it's something that shouldn't have to happen.
Well, and I'll just add some food for thought that through conversations that I've had with the other mayors of East County, including Stovall, he's more opposed to us leaving and forming a fire district without Gresham. Because that, like
Well,
Mitch said earlier, that's about a 25% income loss that would not instant,
Yeah.
but.
Well, you kind of got each other.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. And so I would say his fight and his willingness to die on that sword, which unfortunately would probably happen because the call wouldn't come and the response time is not very good. The willingness to fall on that sword is greater if it's us three cities jumping on board with District 10 or voting or putting that vote out instead of incorporating Gresham into the mix. And so I think it's
You
a
know, one thing I
conversation
think
about
Mitch mentioned it, you know, you get 3 cities to join District 10 and then actually contract with Gresham
Yeah,
to do it too. I mean, that's one option, or, you know, some kind of variation of that, you know, but I know that, you know what the need is, you know what the cost is probably going to be. And I think, you know, anybody that is rational would know the solution. It's for everybody in the 4 cities in District 10. If they all join in to pay for the service, it's shared equally. And, you know, it should work. I mean, it's working all over the 3-county area.
Keep in mind, in the contracting scenario, you're not talking about new monies. You're talking about redirecting the money you're currently spending, you know, to Fire District 10, who has to stand up a fire department with HR services, payroll services, legal service, all the things that go along with that. So that sustainable funding piece isn't answered there. It's probably a step in the right direction, in my personal opinion, but that's just one person's opinion. But it doesn't address the sustainable funding. That would, as Dr. McKill and you know, your Mayor Lara has expressed, will have to come from the voters. And it's a little bit complicated in the sense that, let's say all 5 entities want to put it on the ballot, and let's assume one of the city's voters say no, but everybody else says yes, then what? So you have some of those concerns to be thinking.
Well, the thing is that if Fire District, it has to work both ways. The people in Fire District 10 have to say yes to marry you, and you have to say yes to marry them. If Gresham doesn't vote yes for that, but Troutdale Wood Village and Troutdale citizens do say yes to Fire District 10, then they would be adopted into the Fire District 10 tax base, and it would free up our general fund monies, and it would increase the potential income, but then Fire District 10 would be this negotiator with the city of Gresham for fire services.
Yeah, I mean, it would be better if everybody just said, hey, let's just do
Yeah.
District 10, and it's a done deal.
Yeah.
When we did it, we passed it at District 10 to take Gresham in. And it was because our tax rate would go down about 50 cents. We wouldn't need 286, we could get by in 210. And it would, with you guys, I don't know, our contract with Gresham now is based on a rate per thousand. And so every year when our rate, our valuation goes up, they get more money, and we can, take it in. And it could be the same thing with you, is that over time, it gets to be just part of what everybody's paying. And, you think, I remember when gas was 10 cents a gallon. And, everybody's living with, I see there's $5 now. But somehow people adjust to it, and it solves the problem. But to get them to vote for it, I think is the hardest thing you guys are faced with. Because you know the problem, you know what the costs are gonna be, you know what all the requirements, where you put a fire station, there's a way to do that, so it's done in a way that is good for the system. But ultimately, you got somebody that's sitting at their kitchen table filling out that ballot, and what little thoughts run through their head when they mark it, sometimes it's, you hope people always vote after they've well educated themselves on how to do it, on what they should vote for. You can go any way, but
Kenny?
We know there's gonna be a substantial cost increase either way. And if you went with a fire district, that would free up some general fund money, and it would dedicate some money for fire service going forward. One thing I'm wondering is, at this point, do you really want to jump on the train with Gresham? Gresham tried to float a levy, they couldn't do it. And what are their infrastructure needs? Are you gonna end up doing this and end up funding all of their needs off of this side of the table?
One of our board members talked about, capital improvements, that may benefit one entity more than another. And there could be, and I actually asked our attorney about that, but there could be divisions within the district that would be, it's just like an urban renewal district. Where, some people pay a little bit, like, we don't want District 10 necessarily to pay for 3 new stations at Gresham. And so that's something that's got to be worked out, and there's probably an answer to it and a way to do it fairly, but that's what a 7-person board was there for.
Realistically, that is the best way possible in this sustainable funding view, is that everybody votes to become part of the district, and then the district goes out for a bond throughout the entire response area, and the voters approve the bond, and the bond is for capital expenditures, your facilities and equipment.
I can see Tanny's tracking similar to myself. So once you go to a larger district, your hope is that the population that's covered has the same desired level of service. And Gresham also, for the most part, does have a similar demographic. However, I do believe that they end up responding to more overdose calls than we do here. Probably just, I haven't looked at the locations, probably just to the location, their proximity to Portland. It's just the way it is. And how do you get the service level to meet the needs of the community without it doing something similar with what we see in our other services, where they get sucked away and your service level lowers to the lowest common denominator? And maybe that.
Well,
maybe-
what I would tell you, Rich, is that in our area, where it's a rural area, our service is going to be less than it would be in a built-up area, because you got shorter runs.
Right.
We have an 8.5-minute run from 76 down to Boxbow Park, and somebody gets in the water and gets in trouble down there.
Right, you would want to have the people in
Yeah.
place
You-
to be able to cover the desired needs of the community.
Yeah, the rule is to have enough stations in the right places to do the best you can do. But like out in our area, we're not gonna put 4 stations because we got a bigger area to cover. And, but, like I say, choosing to live in the country, that's one of the things you accept, is that it might take somebody a little longer to get to you.
Right.
I guess to go on that, I would say there's living in the country, but then there's also, it's like if we decide here, let's say Gresham or Fairview Wood Village and Troutdale decide that we want 6 minutes. We don't care what it costs, we want 6 minutes. And Gresham wants 15 minutes. And Gresham's the bigger kid. I could see that ended up being 15 minutes for everybody.
Well, I think, Mitch, they looked into, where to put these stations to do the best in calls. And I think that the knowledge of that is pretty much, taken. Once it gets to the point where you're gonna actually implement that, if you could, you can make certain adjustments to it, but ultimately, you're gonna say, how many stations can we afford, where should they be? And that's just gotta be it, and you're gonna, like I say, up where we live, there's no way we're gonna have another station in the part of the rural area where I live. So I accept the fact that it's gonna take a little longer to get to me if I, conk out having a tuna sandwich. So,
It sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But that's what Dr. McKeel stated, or he stated previously, is that, decisions like that or priorities like that are going to be determined by the board, not necessarily by the city, not necessarily by Troutdale saying, we want better service out here than Gresham. It's going to be determined by the board that would be elected to govern that district. Does that make sense? So it's not going to be,
Does election be based on population?
well, but it's still going to have,
yeah,
I'm just saying if the representation was based on population.
well, I would
Then you
say,
would have-
here's what I would think would happen with a 7-person board. You'd have one from District 10, the 4 cities, so you got 5, and there'd be 2 at large.
You can't do that in Oregon as a fire district. So that's one of the governing problems that exist with a fire district. So assume the response area is the total response area that it is now, the 4 cities and the district. And there's a 7-member board. Those 7 members are elected at large from that entire area. They all could end up being from Troutdale, for example. The only way you get around that is to become a fire authority, which has the governing body structure allowed through legislation that Dr. McKeel just described. Your council could appoint one of your members on that board, but it's a different governing structure than a district.
Well, it's a little different. I was on the school board for a long time too, and we actually, Mount Hood Community College has districts within the governing board of Mount Hood Community College, and Gresham Barlow does as well. I think they have, 2 at large and 5 from zone districts. There's always a talk about whether zoning for a board is better for representation, or if you just want the best people you can get, no matter where they're from. So that's something that, you guys have to decide, if you get that happening. But I think representation that represents everybody in the district to be served is important. It's a big subject. You're not gonna get that solved tonight, but
No.
if you did it,
and we have representation on the board.
No,
or
I
on
just
Gresham
think
now.
they're all things to,
Right.
think about.
Yes, I just wanted to understand a little bit more where the fire district did not pass. Was there any community outreach to kind of figure out what some of the barriers were to that not happening?
well, you mean when we actually voted for,
Yeah.
when Gresham did? I think it was strictly a money thing, and then plus that, we were gonna lower our tax rate, which we had the opportunity to do, but we could not by law get rid of the fact that we could raise it up to 286. So all these guys who were anti-tax activist guys, Don McIntyre and Frank Eisenzimmer and the guy that was in college, anyway, they made a big deal out of it, said, oh, these guys are gonna tell you that they're gonna charge you $2.10 or $100 or $1.90, you know, but you know they're gonna raise it to $2.86 a day after the election. And so, and that's something that's, but now those guys are all dead, so.
So that still though is a very key point in this, because the surveying that was done back when that was put on the ballot, it dramatically showed that the voters in Gresham supported moving to a fire district. Above 70% was the response. But what Dr. McKill is expressing is, if you vote to become a fire district, you're going to pay the tax rate that the district has, currently $2.86, I believe it is. The city of Gresham has no obligation to reduce its collection rate. And so the voters feared that they would not reduce their collection rate, and they would be paying what they're currently paying plus an additional $2.86 per thousand. And the voters surveying said it flipped upside down. Without that guarantee, in the 70 percentile, the Gresham voters said they were not interested in.
Yeah, I think you may have to get some help from the Oregon legislature to, or some way on a state level to, if we promise to lower our tax rate to a certain level, then we are obligated to do that.
So when we did the SAPER Council, we were talking to consultants. We were having a consultant going to come into the next meeting right before the council was asked to stop meeting. The consultant was saying that you can't just arbitrarily lower the tax rate. You can't just say, hey, we're going to lower the tax rate. Now, your mayor and council can vote to say we're going to collect less, but that takes an action of mayor and council. But the 5 entities could collectively enter into an agreement that would cap the town's collection rate, and by agreement, it would essentially do that. But it's a complicated 5-way legal agreement, and all of the cities would have to say, okay, we're not going to collect 50% of the tax rate per se. We'll drop our collection rate to 50% or whatever, and each city could be different. And then the rate of increase, because you're still going to need increases. All of that would have to exist within a complicated agreement, but it's possible. But you can't just say we'll get rid of it.
Right, what it looks like is right now the budget committee and the council takes part of the lease payments from this building and buys down the citizens' bond levy costs to pay for the police building. So theoretically, we pay about $2.5 million currently for fire services in Troutdale. You could say, all right, we're going to take 1.25, half of it, and reduce the burden. So we'll pay that toward whatever the total tax bill would be on all our citizens and reduce the tax rate for it. So it wouldn't be 280, maybe it's 180, 150, whatever the math works out. But in theory, that's kind of how you do it, so that it makes it less burdensome. Move that.
Yeah, I think
Essentially the exact same thing. Mayor and council have the ability to say, we're going to reduce the amount that we collect. You can't reduce the rate available. You just say, we're going to reduce the amount we collect. Essentially the same thing that Ray is talking about there. It takes an action by mayor and council, and then you have to get your voters to trust that you're actually going to do that when you pass a district. So if you enter into this agreement that says, if this passes, this agreement goes into effect, then they know exactly what's happening. But again, it's complicated, and educating the public becomes difficult, but doable.
Yeah, I think you guys say it, I don't want to get into too much of solving this problem tonight. I think, you've got a good idea of kind of, where the planes are circling to land, but I think a lot of these things have to be really well thought through, and they really have to be put to the public in a way that they understand it and that they're accepting of it. Otherwise, it's never going to get done. And I think it is a benefit. I don't want to belittle these guys that died, but they were an effective group of people trying to get you to vote down everything that had a tax increase in it. And, it's no different than, your family, when you have certain costs, if your medical insurance goes up, you got to have it. So, hopefully, you guys, the Wood Village guys and the Fairview guys need to understand all these issues, and then they got to go to the public and be really straight with them about why we're doing it, what's going to happen if we don't, and never tell them anything other than the truth.
Any other? Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, oh, sorry.
just a quick comment. We're fairly social, and so it seems like those guys have gotten replaced by the next generation. So we still have to, like you suggest, watch how we do it.
Well, you gotta be careful. I mean, we had a guy on our board that is not on the board any longer, and he thought when we built the fire station, we should go get a single wide trailer and build a pole building next to it for the engines. And he was serious. Yeah. And I said, hey, it's not the way you do it.
Well, thank
Okay,
you.
all right, anytime, I'm always available. I think it's a good reason to be working towards that, so anytime you got a question, you feel free.
Thank you, Doc.
Okay, all right.
Thank you,
Thank
Chief,
you.
appreciate it.
All right, so number 4 is discussion of additional information related to fire services.
Well, what I would suggest, Chair, is now we're approaching 2-hour meeting. What I want to do maybe on discussion items 4 and 5 is to give you some homework. And I've got some stuff to hand out to you, because the purpose of this working group is to come up with, what do we need the council to learn to enter into this next phase of police and fire services in the future. So it's just like, what information don't we know that we should learn? I've started to put together a list for both fire and law enforcement. So these are the avenues that we might pursue. What do we need to know to pursue these avenues? I mean, examples is, for next steps for Troutdale law enforcement, kind of review the current service level, determine what is desirable. Do we like our current service level or not? Consider lower cost alternatives to law enforcement, because a sworn person with a gun costs a lot more than an unsworn person with a uniform, maybe a park ranger, a code compliance officer. Maybe we cover the increased need with non-sworn officers. Get a bid from the city of Gresham for police services. Again, talk to Multnomah County, a bid from them. Maybe, because the citizens may ask, maybe you say, well, we should hire a consultant. Just what would it cost to recreate the Troutdale Police Department? And what would it cost annually to support a Troutdale Police Department at the desired level of service? Because people are going to ask, so you should find that out. So those are the kind of things I put on the list that may be part of your recommendation to council. You need to learn all this stuff and get this information. I started one also for the fire, and so if you took those with you, thought about them, and then at our next meeting, maybe we have a discussion as to, do we need to hear from more people, or do we need to start saying, this is the stuff that we really need to be finding out in terms of consultants or more information. The other thing I want to hand out, because actually the city of Gresham said they'd be interested in maybe making a proposal for law enforcement services. So what I have here is, and I've yellowed the portion of our current contract that tells what it is actually that Troutdale gets for law enforcement. What is the duties, and then on the back in an appendix, it has how they figured out our initial $2.8 million 8 years ago, how they calculated out the FTEs that we're supposed to get. This is definitely a place to talk to them about under the next negotiation, because it says that we're supposed to get 2/3 of a captain, a leadership position, as our chief. I've loved all 4 of the ones I've worked with. They've all been wonderful, but they've all already had a full-time job at the sheriff's office And I swear, I don't think I get more than 10 or 15% of their time, not through bad faith at all, but just because they have other duties to do. But we're paying for a 2/3 chief. And I pay, we're not getting a third of that. So, but that's just one of the places that you can look at. So just to give you an idea, I know you already have a copy of that contract, but I broke out just the portion that talks about what service level we're currently getting. Now, it doesn't include Nick Bohr, our community resource deputy, which is 40 hours, $230-some thousand annually for that. So I would suggest, Chair, that maybe, this is just a work, I said draft on it, it's just a working idea. Start thinking, what are the things we want to tell council about? You guys need to figure this out and get this information to help you make a decision as to the future. And as I indicated earlier, Gresham is looking out to put it out an RFQ for a consultant to explore what would a fire district look like in the city of Gresham. And the other city managers, you've got Philip is city manager of Fairview. And I don't know who the bald-headed guy is sitting over here, but he's taking up space in here and breathing our air in Troutdale and Eastern Fairview. Yes, you have. By you. By me, probably. But we have talked, and we have possibly that we're going to we might suggest piggybacking on Gresham's consultant for that fire district to have them do the other 3 cities also to determine what would be the financial impact if we did pursue a fire district. Because then the big issue then is the voters have to approve it. Fire district 10 voters, 3 of them, how many are left, have to also approve it. And so that's an avenue that we have to talk about, what the timeline on that, what's the best election, get a consultant for that. And then the other thing also is that we don't want to do, I'm sure, if we're going to pursue a fire district beyond the 10 years we currently have, we're not going to find another 10-year fire contract. And will they actually do it year by year until we can figure out that other option? So that's some of the things that we've talked about and that we can talk about next meeting, all those issues, because getting to the end of this is that what's the roadmap for what your recommendation is to council as to, these are the things you need to go start learning real soon before you can make a final decision as to what's going to provide our police and fire protection. So, so I would suggest, take that, maybe ask, is there anybody else you'd like to hear from in this discussion? And then second of all, when will be our next meeting? So we can kind of get these things figured out.
That was gonna be my next suggestion, is figuring out when the next time we're all gonna meet. And then we can talk about if there's other people that we would like to have come. I think it says a lot that city manager from Fairview's here. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to have city manager for the village here next meeting. And then we can maybe have a conversation with them as regards to piggybacking on some sort of consultant, figuring out what this could look like for the 3 of us going with Gresham, going with Fire District 10, figuring out what we want to do with police. All the simple answers of life.
Yeah, and I agree, and I kind of like to get what is Fairview's point of view? Are you all in, with this idea of going through cities with Gresham, or if Gresham says no, what are we going to do then? Are you still in?
Yeah, I mean, we're exploring that, and we have 3 city groups that talk about next year. But it's an evolving thing. One of the things that there's been some discussion wants to do, in addition to dealing with city managers and your committee, is the idea that city prefers that is to pull the 3 city councils together again to look at the independent from the electeds that teams together.
Also, I apologize for my joking with Keith over here, because some of you may not know who this is. Keith Goodrich is a Fairview City Councilor who's probably going to be the kind of the acting mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
At this point,
Pro Tem.
I'm council president. We'll leave it at that.
So he'll be running the council meetings for Fairview soon. So that's right. Keith and I have been good friends for over 25 years. So, anyway.
Yeah, I like what we did here. I thought the interaction was really good. I wouldn't mind having the equivalent on the police side. I am of the realization that, what we had before with the drop-up police, that was really good service. They did a good job. I don't know if we ever get that back, but my experiences with the sheriffs that I've interacted with and the Gresham law enforcement I've interacted with, I found them to be good people, professional people, and it might be also worthwhile to hear if they have ideas as well.
The only thing that, I'm thinking through what you suggested, great idea. The advantage we had tonight is that Mike has been around, he doesn't care what people think of what he says. He doesn't. And Chief Snyder, he's fire chief down in Florence, Arizona. He's out of state. He's like, he doesn't have any bridges up here to be burned. And so he can be very frank with you. I'm just trying to think of who might be good that has that candidness.
That's a very good
Maybe
point.
former
Yeah,
Chief Sells.
Who?
Former Chief Sells.
Well, that or Dave Nelson, former Chief Dave Nelson. I know Dave just left CIS to work for a different job, but I could get a hold of Dave. He was our, police chief back in the early 2000s, and then city manager for a couple of years before he went to CIS. So I could talk to Dave and see if Dave would feel comfortable talking about this issue. Anybody else you think that might?
Is there somebody on the sheriff's side that
Well, I can
is
ask.
knowledgeable but doesn't have any influencing connection?
Well, I just suggest Monty Reiser, who was our.
He's busy on a
designated chief.
fishing boat, though, every second of his life.
No, he is actually, he's contracted back with Multnomah County Sheriff's
is he?
Office now. He's doing some study work, so he's around doing work, and so he doesn't, he's retired, so let me ask Monty, see if he'd be, Monty and Dave both, see if they both come and talk about it, because Monty has more recent experience in the city of Troutdale in the Sheriff's Office, while Dave has municipal work, and he also, at CIS, he did a lot of loss control stuff there, so he had a lot of involvement with police departments around the state also. So let me check with both of them and see if they could come to the next meeting.
All very good ideas. And I did like Chief Sells as an idea as well.
All right, so we have homework to do. And then set our next meeting date. Are we feeling like we need to meet next month?
I personally feel like we should. So we at council last night, we agreed to extend the length or the life of this group because it was supposed to sunset yesterday. So we extended it. I believe we extended it, Ray, to basically the end of the year.
With the option of going further if needed.
Right, and I think at the first meeting of December. But like Ray said, we're leaving it open-ended, so we'll extend it however long it needs to be extended. But I think we need to move quickly.
I do too. I think this is a lot of information to swallow and to think through tonight. I think that if we keep it going and really meet every month until we get this worked out, then present to the city council. Not with her to exactly. Okay, so next month will be.
But if he did,
Is it the 11th?
it's a Wednesday night, it is Wednesday night.
The 11th? Is it the 11th?
Tanny's giving us the shake.
You've got, Wednesday nights are really gone. You've got two of them are planning commission, parks is one, right?
Yeah, Parks is the 18th.
Monday?
And CAC is the other one. Mondays are good. Nobody meets on Mondays.
Second or the 9th?
9th is Columbus Day or
Oh.
Venus.
Well, Columbus might have met, so it's
Columbus Day.
Oh, and I got Fairview Lake Drawdown that day. That's in the morning, though.
I mean, first of all, Monday, generally good for everyone, make it work. I mean,
Monday works.
the only
Monday can
time-
work. Monday can work,
So the 16th of October,
except for,
I just have to get a hold of, make sure that we can get you some people. 16th or 23rd, is there a preference on those?
I would say the 23rd.
Okay, that's a month out.
16th is sooner.
16th, I'm not here.
Okay, yeah,
Okay, so
Good
the
point.
23rd?
that gives me more time to coordinate, seeing if everybody can be here. Your police consultant. If I think of somebody else, I'll see you, but I'll check with Dave and Monty and Chief Self.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, and then I guess we're on to committee member comments. Twilight?
Yes, thank you. Good discussion tonight. I think the only thing that came up for me is just the thought on, this is a lot for us to take in and understand, so I keep on jumping to the community and how we can really talk to the why the change needs to happen. So that just keeps coming up for me, is how we gonna break this down.
Rich?
I think this is a very good group. I like the discussion. I do think we need to, we don't know what's gonna happen in the future. We don't know what we're gonna face. So being open-minded and keeping our options open is a good idea.
Nothing for me.
My only question was, if we went with District 10, are we gonna have to have new fire stations built if Gresham doesn't go?
No, because the fire district in town, in Troutdale, is owned by Fire District 10.
We'll just
We only
run
have
for
one.
all three?
Yeah, well, that would be something you explore then, and Fire District 10 would have to decide to maybe put out a bond levy to build another fire station. We went our own. See, that's the thing is though, one or two things can happen. If you go Fire District 10 and Gresham does not join Fire District 10, but the three cities do, then Fire District 10 has to decide, do we just go to Gresham and like now contract for fire services and not have to do that? Or can they say, well, maybe it's the big enough tax base now, maybe they create a new fire department. They've got the training center already, they have a fire station in Troutdale already, so they have some facilities at least to do that with, but that's something for Fire District 10 more to decide, depending on who voted in or out.
No, my only worry is if we're having problems with Gresham now and they're having problems getting funding. So if they negotiated with Gresham, we're back to where we were, because we're under Gresham again.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in charge, but we're still under.
I'm not so sure we're having problems with them so much as doing a sanity check. Of our
Well,
options.
by problems, I mean, even the Outlook, I mean, they don't have enough equipment, they're really, Gresham is just having problems. And
Oh, I see your point. All right.
I thought it was a good discussion. I'm glad that everybody was here and that people were meeting. Thank you for coming and being a part as well. We need a motion to
I
adjourn.
move we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, motion to adjourn. Oh, when my ring doesn't.
Very powerful.
We go kill the meeting, you're still on till I come over here. Track down Chief Self.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure where she went. I don't think she lives in Troutdale anymore.
No, she doesn't.